My name is Geneva Washington, and for 40 years, I thought I was the co-pilot of my own life. It took my husband's laugh to show me I had been demoted to a passenger long ago, and a quiet, ignored one at that. The laugh wasn't a big, hearty sound. It was small, a little puff of air that barely moved his chest, but it was loud enough to shatter every window in the house of my heart. It happened at the Covington Foundation Gala, a night that was supposed to be a triumph. It was the grand opening of the Covington Center for the Arts, the crown jewel of my husband Roland's real estate empire. And it was my design. Every curve of the glass, every warm accent of mahogany, every perfectly lit gallery. It had all come from my mind, my hands. But my name was nowhere on the program. It simply read, Covington Development. I wore a deep sapphire gown that night, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. My silver hair was swept up, and the pearls my grandfather gave me were cool against my skin. I felt elegant, proud. I'd spent the first hour mingling, accepting quiet compliments from folks who knew my work, even if the general public didn't. Then, it was time for the main dinner. I made my way toward the head table, table 1, where a beautiful centerpiece of white orchids sat gleaming under the chandeliers. My husband, Roland Covington, was already seated, holding court. He looked like a king in his tuxedo, his salt and pepper hair perfectly in place. Beside him, his mother, Odessa, sat ramrod straight, her diamonds catching the light and firing it back like tiny, sharp warnings. I smiled, moving to take the empty seat beside Roland. Before I could even pull the chair out, Odessa's voice, thin and sharp as a needle, cut through the air. "I'm sorry, dear," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "This table is for family and our most distinguished donors." She gave me a tight plastic smile. The other guests at the table, bank presidents, city council members, froze with forks halfway to their mouths. The silence was thick and heavy. I could feel 100 pairs of eyes turning toward us. I looked at her, confused. "Odessa, She waved a dismissive hand, heavy with rings. "The staff and helpers have a lovely setup in the back ballroom. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable there." She turned back to the man on her other side as if I had simply vanished. The words hung in the air. The help. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. I turned my eyes to Roland, my husband of 4 decades, the father of my 2 children. I was looking for a lifeline. I expected him to be angry, to defend me, to correct his mother's cruelty. Instead, he just looked uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat, gave a weak, apologetic shrug, and then he let out that little puff of air. That laugh. It was the sound of agreement. The sound of dismissal. The sound of him choosing his mother, his reputation, his donors, over his own wife. In that one tiny sound, he confirmed what his mother had said. I was the help. The world went blurry for a second. The chandeliers, the orchids, the faces, they all melted together. But I would not cry. Not here. I am the granddaughter of Theron Washington, and we do not cry where our enemies can see. I straightened my back until my spine felt like a steel rod. I gave a slow, deliberate nod, not to them, but to myself. "I see," I said, my voice steady and calm, though a hurricane was raging inside me. "My mistake." I turned and walked away from that table, each step an earthquake in my soul. I could feel the whispers following me like a trail of snakes. I didn't go to the back ballroom. I walked past the smiling waiters, through the grand lobby I had designed, and out into the cold night air. The illusion of my life, so carefully built over 40 years, had just been bulldozed. And on the rubble, a new and terrible clarity was beginning to form. That night, everything changed. I had spent a lifetime being the silent partner, the quiet strength behind the Covington name. I met Roland when I was just 24, fresh out of Howard with an architecture degree and a fire in my belly. I was brilliant, I knew it. But in those days, a young black woman trying to start her own firm was like trying to plant a garden on concrete. Roland was charming, handsome, and had a family name that opened doors. He saw the talent in me. He said we would build an empire together. And we did. Or rather, I built it, and he put his name on the front door. I was the one who stayed up all night, sketching designs that would win awards. I was the one who understood how a building could breathe, how it could serve the community that lived and worked inside it. Roland was the face. He was good at handshakes, fancy dinners, and taking the credit. I told myself it was for the family. It was for our children, Jamal and Tiana. I wanted them to have the legacy, the name. I let my own dreams shrink so theirs could grow. And over the years, the digs from Odessa became a part of the background noise of my life. She came from old money, a family that had been wealthy for a couple of generations, and she never let me forget that I was the daughter of a man who, in her words, got lucky in the trash business. She never understood my grandfather. Papa Theron wasn't lucky. He was a genius. He started with one truck in Atlanta after the war, collecting refuse. But he was smart. He saw what others threw away. He bought the land nobody wanted, the small, forgotten lots, and held on to them. He invested in other black-owned businesses. He built a silent, solid empire of real estate and sanitation services, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. He hated flash. He drove the same Ford for 20 years. He lived in a modest but comfortable house, but he was one of the wealthiest men in Georgia, and nobody but his lawyer and me knew the extent of it. When he passed, he left it all to me, his only grandchild. But he left it in an ironclad trust. Papa Theron had been suspicious of Roland from the day he met him. "He's too smooth, Jenny," he'd told me once, his voice a low rumble. "A man that smooth is sanding something down." The trust was designed to protect me. I could live off the interest, a generous amount that I used to secretly fund many of the down payments for Covington Development's early projects. But I couldn't touch the principal, not unless a very specific clause was triggered. Papa called it the Dignity and Respect Clause. His lawyer, a sharp young man named Floyd Beaumont, had drafted it. The clause stated that if my spouse ever engaged in an act of gross public disrespect or failed to defend my honor in a way that resulted in my public humiliation, the trust would be immediately dissolved and all assets, all control, would transfer directly and unconditionally to me. It was my grandfather's final act of protection. A nuclear option I never ever thought I would have to use. Before we continue, quick question. What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Standing out there on the curb, with the sounds of the gala muffled behind the heavy doors, my grandfather's voice was as clear in my head as if he were standing next to me. "Never let nobody make you feel small, Jenny. Especially not the folks eating off your plate." Roland wasn't just eating off my plate. I had built him the whole darn table. I had built the house, cooked the meal, and served it to him on a silver platter, and he had just handed me a dirty plate and told me to go eat in the kitchen with the maid. The hurt was so deep it felt like a physical wound. But underneath the hurt, a cold anger was starting to burn, an anger that had been simmering on low for 40 years. My own children, Jamal and Tiana, had started to see me through their father's eyes. They loved me, I suppose, in the way you love a comfortable old chair. I was Mom, the one who hosted Sunday dinners with fried chicken, mac and cheese, and collard greens. The one who watched their kids, Amari and Zola, when they wanted a weekend away. They knew I used to be an architect, but they talked about it like it was a cute little hobby I had before I dedicated my life to their father. They saw him as the provider, the powerhouse. They saw the Covington name, not the Washington blood and sweat that built it. A few months ago, my son Jamal had been talking about buying a new house. I offered to look at the blueprints for him. He laughed. "It's okay, Ma," he said, patting my hand. It's all very technical. We've got a professional for that. He had no idea he was talking to the woman who designed half the skyline of this city. The final, bitter irony was that the mansion we lived in, the sprawling estate in the most exclusive black suburb of Atlanta, was a house I had designed for us, a home. But the down payment, the real money that secured the loan when Roland's credit was shaky 20 years ago, had come from a quiet investment from an anonymous company that was, in fact, just a shell corporation for my grandfather's trust. Roland didn't own that house. In reality, I did. He didn't own his company, not really. So much of it was built on the foundation of my secret money and my uncredited talent. He just didn't know it. He thought the money came from his own smarts, from his smooth-talking ability to get investors. He had no idea his biggest investor had been sleeping next to him for 40 years. I didn't call a car, I walked. The 2 miles home, in my sapphire gown and my sensible heels, felt like a pilgrimage. The cold air felt good on my hot face. With every step, the pain was burning away, leaving something hard and clear in its place. Resolve. My grandfather didn't raise a fool. He didn't build an empire for it to be used to disrespect his blood. The laughter. That was the thing I couldn't get past. The sneer from Odessa I expected. But the laugh from Roland? That was the betrayal. That was the green light. When I finally reached the gates of our home, I punched in the code and walked up the long, curving driveway. The house was dark and silent, a sleeping giant that I had created. It didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like a stage, and the play was over. I didn't turn on the main lights. I walked through the marble foyer, my heels clicking in the silence. I went straight to my study. It was the one room in the house that was truly mine. It was filled with my books, my sketches, and a large drafting table that Roland always complained took up too much space. In the back of my mahogany desk, behind a row of architecture textbooks, was a hidden compartment. Inside was an old, worn leather ledger. It was my grandfather's. Tucked inside the front cover was a single, pristine business card. It read, Floyd Beaumont, Escrama, Executor, the Theron Washington Estate. I sat down in my leather chair, the sapphire dress pooling around me. I stared at the card for a long time. I thought of my life, the sacrifices, the small compromises that became big ones, the love I thought was real that had been proven to be conditional. I thought about the way Roland's eyes had slid away from mine. I thought about my children seeing me as a relic, and I thought about my grandchildren, Amari and Zola. I would not let them grow up in a world where their grandmother was seen as the help. My legacy would not be one of quiet service. It would be one of strength, of justice. The humiliation was the trigger, but my grandchildren were the cause. They would know who their grandmother was. My hand was perfectly steady as I picked up my phone. I took one last deep breath, letting go of the 40-year-old dream of Geneva Covington, wife and mother. And I embraced the woman I had always been underneath, Geneva Washington, the architect of her own damn life. I dialed the number on the card. It rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered, crisp and awake even in the middle of the night. Beaumont? I didn't waver. Floyd? It's Geneva. There was a slight pause. Jenny, it's late. Is everything all right? I looked out the window of the beautiful prison I had built for myself. Everything is finally clear, I said, my voice low and cold as ice. It's time. Activate the clause. I didn't sleep a wink after that phone call. I didn't need to. For the first time in 40 years, I felt truly, completely awake. I sat in my study and watched the black of the night slowly turn to a bruised purple, then a soft gray. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn that I suddenly saw for what it was. Not a symbol of our success, but the grounds of my gilded cage. I wasn't sad. The pain from the night before had cooled and hardened into something that felt like fuel. I showered and dressed, not in one of my comfortable Sunday morning robes, but in a sharp pair of gray slacks and a cream-colored silk blouse. I put on the simple gold hoops my grandfather had bought me, not the pearls Roland had. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a tired old woman. I saw Geneva, Washington, and she was ready for business. By 8 o'clock, I was in the kitchen making coffee. The house was still quiet. Roland, I knew, would have stayed at a hotel after the gala, too embarrassed or too angry to come home and face me after his public betrayal. He probably thought I'd be at home weeping, waiting for his phone call with a half-hearted apology. He had no idea what was coming. The doorbell rang at 8:30 a.m., sharp. It was Floyd Beaumont. He was just as I remembered from our last meeting 5 years ago, tall and distinguished, with a mind as sharp as the crease in his trousers. He carried a heavy leather briefcase that looked like it contained the weight of the world. "Jenny," he said, his voice a warm, respectful baritone. He stepped inside, his eyes doing a quick professional scan of the grand foyer I had designed. "Floyd, thank you for coming so quickly," I said, leading him toward the sunroom. "Coffee?" "Please," he nodded, setting his briefcase down on the glass table. "The clause was triggered by your verbal confirmation at 1:17 a.m. this morning. Per your grandfather's instructions, the dissolution of the trust began at sunrise. All assets, titles, and holdings under the trust's umbrella are now under your sole and direct control. No conditions, no loopholes." He opened his briefcase and laid out a stack of documents, fanning them out like a winning hand of cards. "It's all here. The holding companies, the real estate deeds, the stock certificates, the majority shares in Covington Development." I picked up the top folder. The name on it was Acorn Holdings, LLC. It was a name I'd never seen before. "Acorn?" Floyd permitted himself a small, rare smile. "Your grandfather had a sense of humor. Mighty oaks from little acorns grow. He started this shell company with the first $1,000 he ever saved. It's the primary shareholder, the silent partner, in almost every venture Roland ever undertook, using funds you provided from the trust's interest. He thought he was getting loans from anonymous investors. In truth, he was borrowing from you." My breath hitched. I had known, in theory, that my money was the foundation, but seeing it laid out like this, the sheer scale of it, was staggering. The downtown office building, the new condo development by the river, the chain of luxury apartments, even the land the arts center was built on. It was all mine. It had always been mine. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice steady. "Now?" Floyd said, his tone shifting from informative to strategic. "We execute. My team has already been in motion since dawn. At 9 a.m. precisely, a notice will be served to the Board of Covington Development, calling for an emergency vote to remove Roland Covington as CEO, citing financial malfeasance. Since you, through Acorn Holdings, control 68% of the company, the vote is a formality. You will be installed as interim CEO." He slid another paper toward me. "At 9:05 a.m., our financial team will execute a freeze on all personal and corporate accounts tied to Roland. His credit cards will be declined. His access to liquid assets will be cut off." He paused, looking at me carefully. "And this," he said, pushing the final document forward, "this is the eviction notice for this property. It gives him 24 hours to vacate. It's your decision when we serve it." I looked at the paper. It felt heavier than all the others. This was the home I'd raised my children in, the place where I'd held my grandbabies for the first time. But it was also the stage for my humiliation. "Serve it when he arrives," I said quietly. "He will come here when everything else fails. I want to be the one to give it to him." Just then, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Jamal. My heart gave a small, painful squeeze. My son. Maybe he was calling to see if I was okay. Maybe he was calling to stand up for his mother. Hope, I realized, is a stubborn weed. "Hello, Jamal," I said. "Ma, what is wrong with you?" His voice was high and tight with stress. There was no concern, only accusation. "Dad just called me. He said you made a huge scene at the gala last night and walked out. He's so embarrassed. The donors, the press. Ma, what were you thinking?" The stubborn weed of hope withered and died. "What was I thinking?" I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. I was thinking that after 40 years of marriage, my husband wouldn't laugh while his mother called me the maid in front of 100 people. "Oh, come on, Ma," he sighed, the sound of a spoiled man who had never been truly challenged. "You know how Grandma Odessa is, and you're being dramatic. The help? She probably just meant the event staff. You're twisting things." Before we continue, shout out to Tanya from Atlanta. We appreciate the love you show by commenting and sharing. "Your father laughed, Jamal," I said, cutting him off. "He laughed, and you are defending him." "I'm trying to keep this family from falling apart," he shot back. "Tiana is on the other line with Dad. He's a mess. You need to call him and apologize so we can fix this." Apologize. The word echoed in the silent sunroom. Floyd sat perfectly still, his face an unreadable mask of professionalism, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Pity. Or maybe respect. I straightened my back. "No, Jamal, I will not be apologizing. Things are changing. You and your sister need to decide if you're standing with your father's pride or your mother's dignity." "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "You're choosing to blow up our lives over a misunderstanding." "It was not a misunderstanding," I said, and my voice was like steel. "It was a moment of clarity. I have to go now. There are important things I need to attend to." I hung up before he could reply. The silence that followed was heavy. "Children can be loyal to the lifestyle they know," Floyd said gently. "They're loyal to the man they think holds the wallet," I corrected him. "They're about to get a rude awakening." The next few hours were a blur of coordinated, silent strikes. I sat in my sunroom, a general in her command center, while Floyd made quiet calls. I imagined Roland at his office, strutting into the building that bore his name. I pictured him swiping his keycard to the executive floor and the light flashing red. Denied. The confusion. The call to security. The embarrassment. Then, I imagined him at his desk, trying to move funds for a new project, and the automated voice from the bank telling him the account was frozen. The panic. The angry calls to his personal banker, who would only be able to say, "I'm sorry, Mr. Covington. My hands are tied." Around noon, my daughter Tiana called. She was crying. "Mom, what did you do? Dad's credit card was just declined at lunch. His own company just sent him a letter saying he's fired. What is going on?" Her tears weren't for me. They were for the disruption to her comfortable life. "I'm just claiming what's mine, Tiana," I said simply. "What's yours? It's Dad's company. He built it," she sobbed. "Did he?" I asked. "Ask him where the money came from for his first 3 projects. Ask him who drew the blueprints for the lakeside towers that won him that award. Ask him who really designed the arts center. Then call me back." I hung up. The truth was a bitter medicine, and I had a feeling my children would refuse to swallow it. The storm had broken. Now, I just had to wait for the thunder. It arrived at 2:15 p.m., in the form of a black Mercedes squealing up the driveway. The car door slammed with a sound that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. I stood up and walked to the foyer, my heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm. Floyd stood a respectful few feet behind me. The front door burst open. Roland stood there, his face a mask of purple fury. His tie was loosened, his hair was a mess. He looked wild. "Geneva!" he roared, his voice bouncing off the marble. "What in God's name have you done?" He stormed toward me, his hand raised as if to point a finger, but he stopped short when he saw Floyd. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled. I took a step forward, placing myself between my husband and my lawyer. I held up the single sheet of paper Floyd had given me earlier. The eviction notice. "This is Mr. Beaumont," I said, my voice as cool and calm as a river in winter. "He's my lawyer. And this," I said, holding out the paper to Roland, "is for you." He snatched it from my hand, his eyes scanning the words. He read it once, then twice. The fury on his face slowly melted into utter, complete disbelief. "Eviction notice?" he whispered, his voice cracking. You're evicting me? From my own house?" I looked at the man I had loved, the man I had built an empire for, the man who had laughed at my humiliation, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness where my love used to be. I thought of the promise I'd made to myself the night before. I thought of my grandfather's words. I thought of the future my grandchildren deserved. "It was never your house, Roland," I said, and the words came out with perfect, chilling clarity. "Just like the company was never your company. All these years you thought you were the king of the castle." I gave him a small, sad smile. "You were just the help, and your services are no longer required." Roland stared at the eviction notice as if it were written in a language he couldn't comprehend. The paper trembled in his hand. "My own house?" he repeated, his voice a hoarse whisper. The fury had vanished, replaced by a gaping, hollow confusion. It was the look of a man whose entire world had been pulled out from under him, leaving him standing on thin air. "It was never your house, Roland," I said again, my voice devoid of malice, filled only with a terrible final truth. "You were a guest here. A long-term guest, I'll grant you that. But your stay is over." He looked from the paper to my face, his eyes desperately searching for the woman he knew, the one who would soothe him, who would fix this. He found a stranger. "Jenny, baby, stop this," he pleaded, his tone shifting from blustering rage to a desperate whine. "This is crazy. We can talk about this. Whatever Odessa said, she's an old woman. She doesn't mean it. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I laughed. It was stupid. Don't do this." It was the apology I would have given anything to hear the night before. But hearing it now, it was like a counterfeit dollar bill. It looked the part, but it had no value. It wasn't born of remorse. It was born of panic. "Your apology is 24 hours and 40 years too late," I said. Behind me, Floyd cleared his throat, a quiet signal that we shouldn't linger. "You have 1 day to collect your personal belongings. If you need assistance, a moving service will be provided. The cost will be deducted from the generous severance package I'm authorizing, which is far more than you deserve." His face crumpled. This was Roland's ultimate nightmare. Not the loss of love, but the loss of control. The loss of face. "My company, my accounts. Jenny, you can't. We built that together." "Correction," I said, stepping aside to let him see the reality of the empty foyer. "I built it. You put your name on it. Now I'm taking my name back, my real name. Washington." Suddenly, a new car, a pristine white Lexus, pulled up behind Roland's Mercedes. Odessa got out, looking like a furious hornet in a Chanel suit. She marched up the steps, her face a thundercloud. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. "Roland. What is this man doing in our house? Geneva, I just got a call from the bank. They said our family accounts are frozen on your order. Have you lost your mind?" I almost smiled. Our family accounts. The ones I funded. Roland turned to his mother like a drowning man clutching at a rock. "She's kicking me out, Mama. She's taking everything." Odessa's eyes narrowed into slits. She looked me up and down, her gaze dripping with a lifetime of contempt. "You ungrateful little thing! After everything we've given you? A name? A position in society? This is how you repay us? I knew you were common from the day Roland brought you home." "The only thing you ever gave me, Odessa, was a headache," I said calmly. and the motivation I needed to finally clean house. Now, if you'll excuse me, you are both trespassing. Mr. Beaumont, would you be so kind as to escort the Covingtons off my property? Floyd stepped forward, a solid, immovable presence. Mr. Covington, Mrs. Covington, the police can be called if you'd prefer, but I suggest you leave quietly. Odessa scoffed, but Roland just sagged. He looked utterly defeated. He gave me one last, pleading look. I met it with a steady, unblinking gaze. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked to his car, a king without a kingdom. Odessa shot me a look of pure hatred before following him, her heels clicking angrily on the stone walkway. I closed the door on their retreating figures, the soft click of the lock sounding like the final note of a long, sad song. The silence in the house was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. It was mine. The next morning, the real war began. It wasn't fought with eviction notices, but with emotional blackmail. My phone buzzed with a video call from Tiana. When I answered, the faces of my grandchildren, 7-year-old Amari and 5-year-old Zola, filled the screen. "Nana!" they squealed. My heart ached with love for them. "Hey, my sweet babies," I said, my voice softening instantly. "Mommy says we can't come for Sunday dinner anymore," Amari said, her little face scrunched up in confusion. "She says you made Grandpa sad and took his house." Tiana's face appeared behind them, her expression stony. "They wanted to talk to you," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. "To see the person who is tearing their family apart." The manipulation was so blatant it was almost clumsy. She was using my grandbabies as tiny soldiers in her father's war. The old Geneva would have crumbled. The old Geneva would have promised anything to see them. But the new Geneva understood that this was a test. "Amari, Zola, listen to Nana," I said, speaking directly to them. "Nana loves you more than all the stars in the sky. That will never, ever change. The grown-up stuff is messy right now, but it has nothing to do with you. Our Sunday dinners are just on pause, but I'm going to send you a special surprise in the mail, okay?" Their faces lit up. "I love you both." I ended the call before Tiana could say another word. It hurt. It hurt like a deep, clean wound. But I would not allow my love for them to be used as a weapon against me. I would not teach them that love meant accepting disrespect. I called Floyd. "I want to set up 2 separate educational trusts. One for Amari, one for Zola. Untouchable. Not by their parents. Not by anyone. Only by them when they turn 21. It was the first of many decisions I would make to protect their future from their parents' present. That Sunday, for the first time in decades, I didn't spend the morning basting a chicken or whipping potatoes. I went to church. Not the big, fancy cathedral Roland and I sometimes attended for appearances, but my home church. First Baptist on the west side, the one my grandfather helped build. The music washed over me, the sound of the Hammond organ and the choir singing, "His eye is on the sparrow," settling my soul. After the service, Reverend Alistair Wright, a kind man with eyes that saw more than they let on, took my hand. "Sister Geneva," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "I heard a storm was brewing in your world. The Lord doesn't always calm the storm. Sometimes he calms his child." "Thank you, Reverend," I said, feeling a genuine warmth spread through my chest. I think I'm finally learning to be calm in the middle of it. As I was leaving, Sister Hattie May, an elder of the church who was well into her 90s, stopped me. She put a wrinkled, warm hand on my arm. "I heard what you did, baby," she whispered, her voice crackling with age and wisdom. "Sometimes you gotta burn the whole field down to get rid of the snakes. Now you plant a new garden." Her simple, powerful words meant more to me than any legal victory. The following week, the lawyers' meeting happened. Roland had hired the most expensive, cutthroat litigator in Atlanta. Odessa, Jamal, and Tiana were all there, a united front of entitlement and resentment, sitting opposite me and Floyd in a sterile conference room. Roland's lawyer, a slick man named Barton, started off with a patronizing tone. "Mrs. Covington," he began, "my client is prepared to be reasonable. He's willing to overlook this episode if you agree to reinstate him as CEO and sign over 50% of the assets from this so-called trust. Georgia is a marital property state, after all." I just looked at Floyd, who leaned forward with a calm, almost bored expression. "Mr. Barton," Floyd said, "you seem to be operating under a severe misapprehension of the facts. The Theron Washington Trust was not marital property. It was established with a prenuptial protection clause that predates the marriage, and it contains what we've come to call the Dignity and Respect Clause." Barton scoffed. "That's ridiculous. It would never hold up in court." "Oh, it would," Floyd countered, sliding a document across the table. "Because this isn't a standard prenup. It's an ironclad, multi-generational trust vehicle, ratified by 3 different judges over 50 years. The clause was triggered by Mr. Covington's actions at the gala, an event at which we have sworn affidavits from no less than 15 attendees, including 2 city council members, who witnessed the public humiliation. The moment the clause was triggered, all assets reverted to Ms. Washington, not as marital property, but as the sole, primary heir to her grandfather's estate. Legally, Roland Covington has no more claim to this fortune than you do." The room was silent. Jamal's jaw was tight. Tiana was pale. Roland looked like he was going to be sick. "He is the father of her children," Odessa spat. "He is entitled." "He is entitled," Floyd said, his voice dropping an octave, "to the severance package Ms. Washington has offered, which I might add is far more generous than the law requires. If you choose to contest this, we will countersue for the recovery of all funds Mr. Covington has drawn over the last 40 years under false pretenses. That's fraud, Mr. Barton. A felony. We will see him in court. And we will see him in jail." Checkmate. The fight went out of them. Barton shuffled his papers, suddenly looking far less slick. Roland just stared at the polished surface of the table. He had lost, completely and utterly. The next Monday morning, I walked into the headquarters of Covington Development. The lobby was all glass and steel, cool and impersonal. It was a building I had designed, but it didn't feel like me. The receptionist looked up, startled to see me. Whispers followed me as I walked toward the executive elevator. I didn't need a key card. The building knew who I was. I called an all-staff meeting in the main boardroom. I stood at the head of the long table, the same table where Roland had made deals and taken credit for my work. I looked at the faces of the people who had built this company with me, even if they didn't know it. "Good morning," I said, my voice clear and strong, amplified by the room's acoustics. "My name is Geneva Washington. As of last week, I am the sole owner and CEO of this company. I know there have been a lot of rumors. Let me be clear. Covington Development is no more." A gasp went through the room. "Effective today, we are rebranding. This company will now be known as the Washington Design Group." I paused, letting it sink in. "My name is on the door now. My grandfather, Theron Washington, taught me that your name should stand for integrity, community, and excellence. That is what we will stand for. Our first project under the new name will not be luxury condos. It will be the design and construction of a new, state-of-the-art community center and after-school facility on the West End. Pro bono." A different kind of murmur went through the room. One of surprise, of excitement, of hope. I had their attention. I had their respect. That evening, I was not in the boardroom. I was in the sunroom of my quiet, peaceful house. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. On the drafting table in my study, a fresh sheet of paper was waiting. I wasn't thinking about Roland or Odessa, or the children who would one day have to reckon with their choices. I was thinking about the curve of a roof, the placement of a window to catch the morning light, the laughter of children in a new playground. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Nana?" a small voice said. It was Amari. "Amari, baby? How did you get this number?" "I remembered it from the kitchen phone," she said proudly. "Nana, I got your package. I love the art set. Can you teach me how to draw a house like you do?" Tears filled my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of profound, overwhelming joy. The snakes were gone from the field, and in the freshly tilled soil, a new garden was already beginning to grow. "Yes, baby," I whispered, a real, true smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Nana would love that more than anything. I had reclaimed my money. I had reclaimed my name. But in that small, hopeful voice, I knew I had finally reclaimed my peace, and that was a fortune no one could ever take from me again. That's all for today's story. If this touched your heart, please subscribe and share your own experiences below. We're all in this together.